Welcome to a new Team CGC 9.8 video, and today I wanted to talk about comic book grading companies and kind of do a comparison of CBCS and CGC, the two main kind of comic book grading companies, and just do, pros and cons of each of them, and also look at the prices, kind of like the prices that the books sell, and also like the prices for some of the grading that you can do with each company. Because, right off the bat, kind of just want to lay a couple sort of rules and kind of dispel some main things about, some of these grading companies. But, the first kind of main rule for, choosing whether to purchase CBCS books or CGC books is you really just want to buy the book and not the grading company. You just want to get the best book that looks the best, essentially. So, if you're in the market for like a New Mutants 98 CGC 9.6, and say you zeroed in on one and you were maybe just about to buy, but you ended up seeing like a CBCS 9.6. You looked at that one and maybe it looked better and it was a newsstand and maybe it was $40 cheaper. I think in that scenario, that's like the perfect example of where you could probably buy a CBCS book over a CGC book, where you look at the two equivalent books and maybe the CBCS one's looking better, plus it's cheaper. So you kind of want to look for those scenarios, I think, and that's a good example of buying the book, not the grading company. And you don't want to follow this rule 100% of the time, because if you want a CGC 9.8, then you get it. Like, that's cool. I totally get that. And but most of the time you do want to just buy the book and not the grading company. So if the book's looking better and you're lucky enough to kind of see a CBCS equivalent book of the book that you want and it's looking better and cheaper, those are the kind of opportunities I think you can go after. Another thing is CBCS, they're actually owned by Beckett. BGS is Beckett, and that's the biggest sport card grading authority out there, I would say. So they're a reputable company. I think that's one of those things where if you were just getting into the hobby and you see how big CGC is, and then you say, every now and then you see these CBCS books, you might think that, they're just a company starting out and who knows what could be going on behind the scenes kind of thing. But they're owned by Beckett, and that's a company that I know from the 90s, and, sport card grading. They are the top authority in sport card grading, BGS, graded sport cards. So it's a reputable company. So I think, you don't really have to worry about like them going out of business or something like that. Something catastrophic happening to, maybe some of the cases like which happened to PGX, which has severely kind of depleted their value. I don't think anything like that will happen to a CBCS, because we can kind of go through some of the details of the cases. So yeah, I mean the two main points is kind of buy the book, not the grading company, and CBCS is a reputable company. Like, it's not just a new company. So those are kind of some of the two things like right off the bat that are good to know. So you could feel a little bit more comfortable, I think, going after CBCS books. So, want to get it into kind of a pros and cons here of CBCS versus CGC books. I think probably one of the biggest pros of CGC books is just the case feel and even the look and feel, especially with the new labels on some of the CGC books. They look really cool. Whereas, CBCS, I got a Transformers #1 in the first print in a CBCS 9.8. Great looking book, nicely centered with nice colors. Kind of definitely a buy the book, not the grading company scenario. When I saw it, and it was just really nicely centered with good colors. It's kind of easy to put a good bid in for this one because I was hunting for it. But, so the CGC cases, I think, I really like the feel of them better. They have that indentation sort of at the top of the label, which makes the label part really thin. And you can kind of place your thumb in it a little bit easier when you're sort of doing that with one hand. Such a trivial thing, I think, but yeah, for me the CGC cases kind of feel and look better, whereas this is just kind of one flat slab, more like an old CGC case. This, I think, is actually heftier, but one of the reasons why I think that you don't really have to worry about CBCS going kind of the route of PGX is, one, because they are owned by Beckett, but two, their cases, they have these clips on them. So there's 1 clip, 2 clip, 3 clip, 4 clip here. And they feel somewhat, not brittle, but if you tried to basically take out the comic, you're going to break the case. So there's no way to put in a comic lesser, to try to do any of those fraud or counterfeit techniques, because the case would be broken. It's very tightly held together, I gotta say. It's a very tight case, which is great. The CBCS case is still really good, even though I prefer the CGC case look and feel. Still really good cases, but with these clips, I feel that there's no way a PGX type scenario is gonna. And for those not familiar with PGX, basically there's a lot of videos of people just cracking open a PGX and putting in a 9.4 or in a 9.8 case and then cracking it back together, and it's perfect. It looks like. So I don't think that can happen with this, because they have these somewhat clips here that I feel would just break off if you were trying to pry open the case in some way. So I think in that way, they're really thinking about the security is what I'm trying to say, and I don't think that's going to be an issue at all with CBCS books, which is good, because PGX books are really lower in value on the internet compared to CBCS and CGC books. So another thing I kind of like about CBCS books, in my experience anyways, is they have less Newton rings. So those Newton ring things are kind of the squidgy, colorful marks sometimes you get on CGC books. And this, personally, my Transformers #1 has no Newton rings. It's just spotless case. So I don't know, I think CBCS might have kind of figured it out, whereas somehow CGC hasn't figured out how to get rid of those squidgy things, which is kind of crazy for me, I think. But yeah, lesser Newton rings, I would say, on CBCS books. I'm sure some of them might have them, but so another thing about CBCS I really like is they have free online grading notes. So I believe CGC has that if you're their member, but I think with CGC you can simply just scan the comic. There's these little smartphone scanners here, and it'll bring up grader notes for your issue, and you could do that from your mobile phone at any time, which is really cool, and CGC doesn't do that. To my knowledge, a con against CBCS is they don't really have a census yet, and I think that's a real big positive for CGC, is that just their history and the census and how big the census has become, and it really shows a lot of information about certain issues and how rare they are. And I mean, in a sense, and what I did for this issue, I showed the CGC census information on my video that I did for this Transformers 1 a month or 2 ago when I got it, because that's going to be a pretty good representation of how rare the issue is and how many are there out there, even though there might be 10 or 20 CBCS 9.8 Transformers 1s. But to my knowledge, I don't believe there's a census. Maybe there is if you're their member. I was looking on their site this morning and could not find it. Somewhat of a positive, I would say, is just for Canada viewers and people living in Canada like me. CBCS now has a Canadian office, so much easier to kind of ship your books to them, get them graded, have them shipped back in not a huge amount of time, and you're not going to have to worry about tariffs going there or back, because that happens a lot on books. They think you're selling them when you're just really just sending them over to get a service done to them, but there could be complications like that. So the fact that CBCS has a Canadian office and CGC doesn't, I think is a really good positive for CBCS, especially if you're Canadian. Talking quick about the CGC fraud and counterfeit. I think you don't really have to worry about those issues with CBCS, but CGC, I think the old cases are somewhat questionable. I have an online friend of mine that bought an old case, Batman 404, and he got it, and the case was all cracked, and it was really weird, he thought, and the book, he thought, probably didn't even look like a 9.8, because it was a CGC 9.8. So, you always want to buy from kind of reputable sellers, try, if they're not reputable, hopefully their feedback is still 100%, and definitely message the seller, see how much communication they have with you. That's usually a measure of like how much they care. But really good to know that these kind of CBCS cases are have this sort of design to them that I think is probably even more secure than CGC. Given that there are a lot of videos out on YouTube about CGC fraud and counterfeit, and it's never happened to me personally, but I'm sure I'm sure it does happen. Now, another quick positive, CBCS actually verifies unwitnessed signatures, which I think kind of, goes back to them being owned by Beckett and having a lot of professionals, already on staff in signatures, because sport memorabilia is so big with signatures. So that's kind of another positive. Now, I want to kind of get into price, and I'm going to put a link in the description below to the CBCS pricing kind of chart and everything, and the CGC one, because it kind of gets into it based on like how much your book is, if it's before 1975. But basically, a sort of basic grading I'm getting from CBCS from 1975 to modern. It's $16 for members and $18 for non-members. So that's kind of modern books, CBCS grading prices per book, $16 for members, $18 for non-members. And then pre-1975, so it's kind of Bronze Age, Silver Age books, $27 for members, $30 for non-members per book to get a book graded. And CGC, again, go to the description because there's so many different, it's all based on the fair market value of your book too. Like if your book's more expensive, they take more of a cut kind of thing. CGC from the 1975s to moderns are a flat $20 per comic, so a little bit more expensive, I guess. 16 to 18 is the lowest you can get at CBCS. I guess if you're a member, it's $16. So CGC's is 20, so a little bit cheaper. CBCS, I guess. And pre-1975, it starts at $27, which is the same price that it starts at in CGC, and goes up to $100. So they both kind of start at the same price for pre-1975, which is $27, and based on the fair market value of your book and a bunch of other things too. Check out the descriptions in the book. But when you're purchasing CGC books and CBCS books, in general, I think I would say CBCS books go for about 10 to 20% less than the equivalent CGC book. 10 to 20% less. Again, that's if they kind of both look the same, which is, it's hard to have like the exact same item in comic books because every comic is different. And even that's what's kind of cool about the pricing on these markets is, based on if it's a centered issue or if it's uncentered, or if the coloring's a little bit dimmer. Like I notice all those now, and I'm probably willing to pay more for one where the colors are really nice and it's perfectly centered. So but in general, I would say the rule is like CBCS books are about 10 to 20% cheaper for the equivalent book. So it goes back to that kind of original scenario. If you're looking for a certain book and a CBCS equivalent pops up and maybe it's looking better and maybe it's cheaper, I think those are the kind of opportunities that you would want to like purchase a CBCS book. I told you about those prices and the links. I would kind of recommend overall, I think the main thing you should get from this video is that CBCS is a legit grading company, and you don't have to worry about kind of some of the basic issues with them. So you can feel comfortable, I think, purchasing CBCS books in that kind of scenario that I said before. But I think for me, because the market is so dominated by CGC books, and I would say probably 90% of graded comic book sales are still CGC sales. I would recommend to don't let 10 to 20% over your collection go into CBCS books. So I wouldn't get into purchasing half CBCS books and half CG. I would kind of keep it to where about the sales are, whereas I would say at least 80% of graded comic book sales are CGC sales still. Because yeah, on the way out, it's a little bit easier to sell these if you ever wanted to sell them. And yeah, I think, again, I do prefer the CGC cases, I gotta say. Even when they're in the stored away, I like how the top label looks a little bit better on CGC books as well. But again, if you're just buying the book, I could totally see, it might be even smart to even like specialize in CBCS books, right? As long as you're getting really good deals. I think that's what it comes down to. If, a really good deal pops up in a CBCS book, like, those are the deals to jump on. Even if, do your pricing research and get the right pricing information. Make sure it actually is a deal. Because a lot of times if you just wait, you can get a CGC, whatever comic it might be, in an auction for probably a similar price to what you're looking to pay for at the time. So might not be worth it, but again, kind of looking at those opportunities where there's the equivalent book and it probably looks better and it's cheaper, I think those are times to go after CBCS books. Yeah, don't be worried about security or anything. And but overall, I still really like CGC books, and the census is so packed, which is a super positive. And I still would recommend to have probably about 80% of your books at least CGC, even though CBCS is pretty great. Okay, I think kind of hashed it out there, and that'll be all for this video. And if you haven't already, please join the team and subscribe to Team CGC 9.8 here. When you press subscribe, the bell will pop up, and hit the bell for all our latest notifications. Add me on Instagram and Twitter as well. I'm active on those platforms. I'll have all the links in the description below. Thank you very much for watching today, and I'll see you on the next video.